I apologize. I just did what I always tell you not to do, and that is leave your cell phone on when you're doing something else that's important. Okay, when we left, we were talking about the extent to which in Plato's allegory of the cave you can recognize things. You know that there's something projecting an image, but all you can see is the shadowy substance that's being reflected on the wall. So what you are seeing is actually only the changing form. And as we described it, this idea was very adaptable to Christianity. The idea of an immortal, invisible kingdom, whereas this world is just passing, particularly as interpreted by a later philosopher, Plotinus, in what became known as Neoplatonism, in which he talked about how these ideas, the soul, actually sparked off from the world of ideas and became implanted in physical matter. And what the soul longs for is to be freed from this matter, which of course occurs at death, and to be reunited with the ideal. So you can see how Christianity took that idea and ran with it. Although the original idea embedded within Christianity itself is not so much immortality, although there is an immortality of such, but the idea of the resurrection of the dead, which is more of a Hebrew idea. But nevertheless, enough about that. So, the debate over form and matter continued after Plato. Plato's great student Aristotle had a different view, and that reality was composed as form was imposed upon matter, and so that you actually didn't have real things until it was composed both of form and matter. So it is both changing and unchanging. Now, modern viewpoint really comes out of what we call the Enlightenment of the 16th, 17th, 17th and 18th century, actually. Particularly the British Enlightenment, philosophers such as John Locke and George Berkeley. And they believed that everything that we know we get through our senses. And it's only as our senses pick up this data that we are able to truly know something. Some of them, particularly George Berkeley, Bishop Berkeley, and later in Germany, Immanuel Kant, pointed out, but there's also a function of the mind that organizes and receives this data and makes it comprehensible to us. And if we can't organize and receive this data, then it has no meaning for us. The greatest example of that is Berkeley's question, which we've all heard mimicked even on TV. If a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, to receive the data, does it make a sound? Which logically is impossible to resolve. Technology claims to do it, but technically only if it has a receiver there of some sort, even if it's a mechanical receiver. So, particularly with Kant, you have the mind as a categorical filing system, which files these perceptions and makes them understandable. Now, of course, you understand that to find total knowledge is going to be difficult because that requires a function of the mind which we may not all share or we may not all have to the same extent. So, in actuality, most of what we sense, we interpret it through something called common sense realism, which was a Scottish invention, very common at the time of the American Revolution, and probably the predominant American philosophy of the time, and that is that our common sense, our mind, interprets the data we get, and that is what is to be trusted. So whatever we take it for common sense, by common sense, and that is how we interpret. Always the danger, of course, is that some people don't have common sense, or nothing that resembles any type of common sense. But it's still a category of the mind. And this even carries over when we look at the development of the modern scientific method. How do we know things? We observe them. We form a theory about it. We experiment to prove the theory up or down. We experiment. We observe the experiment, and then we reformulate our theories to adjust to the facts of the experiment. And this works generally very well in the world of things. Although some of modern science, and particularly of quantum science, the study of very, very small things, subatomic particles, shows us that we really don't have a theory to explain some of the things that happen on the subatomic level, that things appear and disappear sometimes in quite unpredictable ways. Which goes back to one of the critiques of the scientific method, one made by a philosopher by the name of Michael Polanyi. And Polanyi said that when we talk about science, what we are really talking about is the faith of the scientific community. What the scientific community, through its experiments, through the experiences of various scientists, have come to accept as being true and factual, what seems to be proven, although understand that from a purely scientific point of view, nothing is ultimately proven because you only need one exception to it to unprove it, that there is an exception. And he would point out, this is why sometimes it's so difficult to have breakthroughs in science, and that it is only the renegades, people like Albert Einstein, who refuse to accept the faith of the scientific community at face value and who look at things in a different way, who are able to formulate theories to explain these new things that we have. So, interesting topic. Countless arguments. You'll read about them in your book, and you'll see them on your test. So, have fun. I hope by the end of it, you will know what you know.